Chapter 34, Section 3. The Republican National Convention of 1976. You're going to see a challenge to Ford by Ronald Reagan. And Ford wins the nomination. So Reagan doesn't win this nomination. And Ford's vice presidential candidate is going to be Bob Dole. The Democrats are going to nominate Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter's vice presidential candidate is going to be Walter Mondale. And here's the thing about Carter. Carter was a Washington outsider. He was untouched by that Watergate scandal. He promises not to lie to the people. He's a born-again Christian that pledges to make the government decent, honest, and trustworthy again. The election is going to be close, but Carter wins 297 to 240. That's all we're going to talk about out of Section 3. We just need to cover that. Now we're going to talk about Chapter 35, Section 1. So let's talk about now that Carter is president. Carter does have some successes, but overall, people just generally weren't very happy with Carter. His approval rating in July of 1980 was only 31%. To give you an idea how low that was, when Nixon resigned, his was 24%. People were frustrated with Carter. We had domestic problems that Carter didn't seem to be able to find any solutions for. Things like inflation, unemployment, the energy crisis. Oil had skyrocketed. You had some gas stations that had to close or reduce their hours. They would limit how much oil or gas somebody could buy, and you'd have these lines that would stretch for blocks. People would turn off their cars and just push them in order not to waste the gas to get to the station. But probably the most damaging issue going to face Carter was the Iran hostage crisis. Now, Iran was critical to us in the Middle East. Remember, back in the 1950s, we had helped overthrow the Iranian premier, and we had put the Shah into power. So we were tied to Iran here. The Shah's rule was harsh. We still supported him, though, because he was a friend of ours. In 1979, the Shah is going to be forced to flee Iran by the followers of the Ayatollah Khomeini. The Ayatollah Khomeini is going to turn Iran into an Islamic Republic. And so the Shah's out. The Shah is going to need some medical treatment. Not from injuries or anything, just some, I'm not sure if it was a cancer or whatever, and you need some of the best medical treatment, you come to the United States. And so Carter is going to allow the Shah to come into the U.S. for medical treatment. Iran is ticked. They wanted the Shah back. They wanted to put him on trial or whatever. And Carter's not going to turn him over. He's here of his own accord. November 4th, 1979. 53 Americans are going to be taken hostage at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iran. These militants took these Americans with the hope that they could convince us to give them the Shah to put on trial. Basically, blackmail. You want your people back? give us the Shah. We are not going to give them the Shah. Let's jump to April. So about 6 months into their captivity, we're going to finally organize a rescue mission. That fails. The helicopter's going to crash in the desert. 8 U.S. soldiers die. And I tell you what, people were ticked at Carter. First of all, they're taking our people, and you waited so long to try and take them back, and then the rescue mission you organize and authorize fails. What the heck, Carter? People start to worry that maybe we're not a world power anymore. And one of Carter's own cabinet members says Khomeini wouldn't have touched the Soviet embassy. Think about it. They weren't scared of us. But the Soviets, they knew they'd come in full force. So during the midst of all of this, we're going to have an election. The election of 1980. The Republicans are going to nominate Ronald Reagan. And his VP candidate is going to be George H.W. Bush. The Democrats, Carter and Mondale, are going to run again. In this election, Reagan basically comes out and says, Carter's weak. He's weak, and he's leading the U.S. into a decline in power. And if you want a strong U.S. again, Reagan's your guy. I mean, this appealed to Republican and Democratic voters. And you actually had a group of Democrats that refused to support Carter, and they supported Reagan. They become known as Reagan Democrats. Reagan wins 489 to 49. Every time there's a presidential election, every 2 years even, there's an election in Congress, and you're going to have less Democrats win in the House. And for the first time since Eisenhower was elected, for the first time since 1952, the Republicans were going to control the Senate. Now, the election takes place in November. New president doesn't take office until January. So Carter is going to continue to try to negotiate for his last, couple months here, negotiate for the hostages to be released. On January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan takes office. On January 20th, 1981, after being held hostage for 444 days, the hostages are released. The hostages were released 6 minutes after Reagan was sworn in. Iran was not going to release those hostages to Carter no matter what. And when Reagan becomes president, they release the hostages. So let's talk about who Reagan was here. Originally, Reagan was a Democrat. He was a New Deal Democrat that had turned into a conservative Republican. Let's talk about some of these terms here. On a political spectrum, you have a left and you have a right. And in the middle is what you would typically call the moderates. The liberals fall to what's called the left. The conservatives fall to what's called the right. If you're left of the moderate side, you're a Democrat. If you're right of the moderate side, you are a Republican. So he was originally a New Deal Democrat turned into a conservative Republican. And a lot of Reagan's support is going to come from what was called the New Right. This group of political conservatives who were tired of liberal politics. And the leading new right group was called the Moral Majority, which was a fundamentalist Christian organization led by Jerry Falwell. The goals of Reagan and the New Right. They supported school prayer. They supported a strong defense. They supported free market economics. They were opposed to abortion, the Equal Rights Amendment, gun control, and busing to racially balance schools. Reagan's economic plan becomes known as Reaganomics. It is based on supply side economics, what's known as the trickle down theory. And the idea was to lower the top income tax rates on the rich, lower their tax rates, because the rich were the ones who owned the businesses, the industries, and they already have personally more money than they need. And so if you lower their tax rates and their businesses pay less taxes, they're going to reinvest that money into the business, which will in turn create jobs, which will in turn increase economic growth. That's Reaganomics. That's the trickle-down theory. Congress is also going to pass a 3-year tax cut, and government regulation of industries is going to be cut as well. This is Reagan's economic plan. Now, obviously, as with any politician, there's going to be opponents to this. And the opponents to Reagan's economic plans said it favors the rich. The rich are just going to become richer. And they also say, wait a minute, so we're going to spend more money, but we're decreasing taxes, so we're decreasing income. That's a deficit. We're going to be spending more money than we make. And so any cuts are going to come from poor programs. But what quieted some of the opponents was the economy started to take off under Reagan.